Hello there, Liz Shaw from Shaw Lifestyle. Here today to talk a little bit about gluten. Now, I know this is something, gluten-free diets have become a fad, and some people will tell you that it's fabulous and get rid of gluten, it will solve everything. And other people will say to you, God, we've all been eating wheat forever. What's the problem? Shut up, everyone. It's just a fad. Now, I have quite a lot of experience in this because I'm celiac. So, well, if anyone doesn't know what that means I'm gluten intolerant. I cannot eat wheat. I don't have an option. And I've been like that all my life. I was diagnosed at 6 months old. So I've never known any different. What this means is when I first qualified as a PT and first started sort of talking to people about their nutrition, I found the conversation around gluten kept coming up more and more. And so I've ended up working with an awful lot of people who have chosen to experiment with gluten and either cut down to a very large extent. Some have just gone gluten-free entirely, and some are just a lot more aware of what and when their gluten intake happens. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. I'm not here to tell you you must give up gluten, not by any means. But what I am here to tell you is that for an awful lot of people, it can make a massive difference to a lot of things. So if you do have a specific gluten intolerance, or you have a tendency perhaps towards celiac disease like myself, then there are various symptoms that may come up, from the sort of obvious of diarrhea and things like that, to irritability, to extreme fatigue. So all of those things, anything like that, if you think there might be a gluten connection, I really, really do recommend that you try cutting it down, cutting it out. Talk to your GP. I'm not a GP, that's not my, it's not my place to talk you through that, but it's certainly worth thinking about. But aside from that, there are many other things that it can affect. And the thing that I think probably the largest amount of my clients have found a difference with is joint pain. I have a lovely client, one of my first ever clients, who suffers from various autoimmune conditions, and she decided to cut out gluten and went from what she used to call sausage fingers, so literally having her fingers being so swollen every day that she would wake up, and being on sort of high dose Nurofen or whatever painkillers she was choosing to take, to cutting down the painkillers massively and just losing that swelling in the fingers, in the joints. So certainly for inflammation, which is the basis of so many diseases, it can be very, very effective. For joint pain, for arthritic issues, for autoimmune conditions, it can affect respiratory conditions as well. I mean, there are so many things that it can affect. So my suggestion is that you do a little bit of research around what gluten is actually in. Because people think when they're going to cut out gluten, they're going to stop bread and pizza and pasta, and okay, that'll probably do. Well, those are some of the obvious: breads, pastas, pizzas, biscuits, a lot of chocolate that's got wafer or biscuit in it, anything like that. But there are also those other little things like daddy's sauce, so all sorts of different sauces, gravy browning. There's so many places that gluten is lurking without you realising it. And this is what happens so often. People say to me, oh, well, I've tried cutting out gluten, but it didn't really work. But they didn't really know how to go about it because they weren't consciously aware of how many things actually contain gluten. So if you're thinking about giving this a go, I advise you to start reading labels. I advise you to do that anyway. It's not very exciting, but there's a lot of stuff lurking in foods that we're not necessarily aware of. In terms of gluten, you'll find it very easy because it will be there in bold. Either wheat or gluten will be in ingredients. If it's there, it's got to be emboldened. So just take a look and start to be a little bit more aware. Another one is soy sauce, people don't think of. Soy sauce is wheat-based, so, it's a no-go. There are gluten-free soy sauces out there, though, fortunately. And there are a lot of different options. When I was growing up, gluten-free food was pretty terrible. I mean, the bread tasted like cardboard. It was awful. My poor mother had to home cook everything because there was just no decent options. Nowadays, as you know, the gluten or the free from aisles are full. I would steer clear of a lot of those because they tend to remove the gluten and replace it with sugar and other really not very good things. So I would really advise either home cooking, which I would always advise anyway, but also go for the simple options. So if you're cutting out pasta, have rice or potato instead. There's plenty of other carbohydrate options. Pizza, that's a bit more difficult one unless you want to go into a sort of a quinoa base or some of the more unusual options. But there's a lot of things you can cut out pasta and use potato, rice or quinoa. You can cut out bread. I know a lot of people who are not keen on gluten-free bread. What they'll do is they'll buy the best one they've found, a loaf of sliced bread, pop it in the freezer so that they can use it when they really need to. But the rest of the time, they shift away from bread, and that's not a bad thing. We tend to be far too reliant on bread, so don't get rid completely, but put it to one side, find some other options. Make it an excuse to do a little bit of an overhaul of your nutrition in general and see what other options there might be out there. And I think that's one of the really important things to realise here. One of the real positives about cutting out gluten or dairy or whatever it may be is it makes you more aware of what you are eating. It makes you more mindful, more consciously aware of what you're putting into your system, and that really matters. So that has to be a good thing. If you'd like to know any more about this, as I say, it is something that I'm very experienced in, having been gluten-free all my life. And I've worked with a lot of people. Again, I have autoimmune conditions myself, so I have a lot of experience in working with people with autoimmune conditions who have found cutting out gluten to be very helpful. So if that's something you'd like to know more about, then do get in touch.